Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness podcast. I'm here with co-host Walter Dial, who is tax partner at GRF CPAs and Advisors here in Bethesda, Maryland. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building sellable or transferable business value, and then for planning your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that's sellable and then exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. If you've been a regular listener, you've heard our consistent exhortation to start planning now, because it takes longer than you think to get ready for a successful exit. If you wait to begin planning until you're, quote, ready to exit, then you and your business won't be ready. You've heard us say these things over and over so many times. Your response at this point might be something like, okay, start planning today. I get it. Enough already. Or perhaps you've had this thought, that sounds self-serving. You guys are exit planners, right? Sounds self-serving that you would continue to say, get started planning today. And that's fair. It can sound self-serving, I guess, for us to continue to say that. But it's probably the most important thing we say in any of these episodes. And so we're going to highlight today, we're going to take some time today to actually highlight some clear reasons why it's wise to start planning sooner rather than later. So today's topic is, why do I need to start planning now? Walter, let's give some reasons to start planning now for the exit routes that are most common to our clients, and probably to the folks who listen to our podcast, which would include sale to third party, sale to insiders, key employees, co-owners, transfer to kids, and ESOPs. But let's get started with what's foundational. Any exit route where an owner wants to get value out of the business eventually. And that's building a business that's actually sellable for the money net of taxes that the owner wants to get out or needs to get out to do whatever they want to do next. Yep. So what comes to your mind when you think about what are your thoughts about the time it takes to build a sellable business?
I think what you said just there about building a sellable business is a great point, and that's what's going to take, one of the things that's going to take a lot of time. But let me go back a step, just because, being a tax guy for 40 years, the first thing that pops in my mind is taxes. And I'll give you an example. I have a client right now who is looking to be acquired probably by a venture capital company. And it's a pretty big sale. He's going to get 10 to 15 million, something like that. So huge tax impacts. So one of the things we're talking about doing is putting a portion of the stock into a charitable remainder trust. So, number one, you got to kind of strategize. There's a lot of calculations that go into that, because you are giving up a certain amount of what you were planning on getting. Now you're going to be able to access the income and things like that, but you got to, it takes time to figure out how much you're going to put in that. Number two, it takes time for the documents to be drawn up. And number three, the IRS doesn't like it if you park the stock in there the day before the sale. So that's just, it's one example of how the tax planning scenario that takes time to implement. So I think, you said one of our goals is helping business owners maximize the value of their business. And when you say that, you and I understand that we're talking about net sales proceeds, which means after taxes. So the tax strategies that are going to be most beneficial take time to implement. So off the top of my head, I would say probably not the number one reason, but a very important reason that you want to start planning early is you want to be able to take advantage of all the various tax planning opportunities that are out there for you.
Yeah, okay, great. That's fantastic. So tax planning absolutely can take time, and that has, and that's directly tied to how the business is structured. Is it going to be a C Corp, LLC,
Yep.
so on and so S Corp, whatever it's going to be. And it can be advantageous with a lot of small business, for example, with a lot of small business transactions, it can be advantageous to be a pass-through or S Corp or
Yep.
LLC. And if you're a C Corp, then there's a conversion and you convert to a pass-through. That takes time, but for that to play out, right? You want to describe that real quick?
Yeah. So for instance, we're working right now with a client that before they came to us, they had been a C Corp, or they had been an S Corp. Their prior tax person had converted them to a C. Now they're talking about hopefully growing the business and exiting in 5 to 6 years. Well, it's going to be best for them to go back to S Corp. But when you do that, the IRS, if you sell your business within a 5-year window, they still tax you like a C Corp, to state it simply. Fortunately, in this case, you're working with her to really help her grow the value of the business, and everyone understands that to reach the size she wants to, it's going to take at least 5 years. So we're in good shape there. But if it was a client who wanted to get out sooner, and they're stuck as a C Corp, well, there's a potential for double tax for the next 5 years. So yeah, I think that's exactly what you're referring to.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Yeah, so in the work that we do, we really identify assumptions. All business owners are making assumptions about exit the way we do, the way we make assumptions about everything. And so we want to identify the assumptions and then test them. And then also we're trying to identify gaps in both readiness of the business and readiness of the individual and their personal planning as it pertains to the exit route that's going to make the most sense for them and their situation to accomplish their goals. And so one of the assumptions that I think is pretty common, I know you would agree with me on this, is that owners a lot of times think they'll be able to sell their business when they want to sell it and for their number, which too often turns out not to be the case. Either it takes longer to sell it, or maybe they can sell it and sell it right away, but for much less than what they thought they were going to be able to get for it, or what they need. And so one of the things so when it comes to building a sellable value or business, you don't want to find out when you're, quote, ready to leave that, you know what, my business isn't nearly as sellable as I thought it was. I can't get near the money. I can't replace with a sale and sale proceeds net of taxes. I can't replace my current standard of living. So I'm kind of trapped. So then building a sellable business takes years to do. As we often say, good exit planning is good business planning. And so let's talk about some of the factors or value drivers, if you will, that need to be in place typically for a business to get maximum value. And then why it takes time to get these value drivers in place. I'll start with one. The management team, the business too often the small businesses, it still centers around the owner way too much. And there might be some managers in place or supervisors, but they're not real strong as a team. Maybe they can't take the team to the next level of growth and so on and so forth. So a management team is a value driver that's going to help maximize the value of the business. And that can take time to put in place. It's hard to do that in 6 months. It's hard to do that in 1 year. It usually takes years to do that, and it is a major driver of value. What are some of the others that come to mind for you?
Yeah, I think you just hit on the big one, because most of the clients we work with, not all, but definitely more than half, the businesses are just too owner-centered. And you're right, you're really fortunate if you happen to hit on the right hires right off the bat. Oftentimes that doesn't happen, and even if it does, it takes a few years to get the team really in place and running well. The other things I would say is, we've talked about on previous podcasts about the whole idea of doing sell side due diligence. So, one of the things you do when your first engagements with new clients is, you do a readiness assessment, which in a sense is kind of a scaled down sell side due diligence. But a lot of the things you come up with when you do that we see, I think one is buyers want businesses that have systems in place. So not only do they want the people in place that can run the business, but they want the systems in place. And that can take a while, transitioning from an in-house accounting system to maybe outsourcing it. That'll take at least two years probably to really get that running smoothly. Same with HR. A lot of our clients are not large enough to hire an in-house HR person, so they might want to outsource that. All those things take at least, the first year it's a little choppy. The second year it starts running smoothly. So in my mind, any system change is going to probably take 2 years. So I think that's another area where you need to kind of plan ahead and you need time to implement it properly.
Yes, I happen to have a due diligence checklist up on my screen, right, one of my screens right now, and it's got 8 pages. It's 8 pages, and it's single spaced with 15 different categories of all kinds of stuff, from public relations to environmental issues to legal and litigation, contracts, customer market information, whole list of things. That it's so much easier if you plan and have those systems in place to monitor and keep on track of all this stuff over time, rather than trying to get it all together in 30 minutes or 6 months. And so that can take time.
Yeah.
Other examples of value drivers that if strong, can maximize the value of the business, of course, would be financial performance, and just monitoring that and being tight on it. But not just the financial performance, but the financial controls, and being able to produce good books, and to do it quickly, and to have all of this systematized and organized. Would you have any comments about financial controls or financial performance?
Yeah, a few things. So just on financial reporting, most clients will use like QuickBooks or something like that. And unless they have bank loans, they're probably just relying on their internally generated QuickBooks financials. Once they're looking at selling, they're probably going to want to have a higher level financial statement, because that's going to give the buyer some comfort. So we would recommend at least a reviewed financial statement. There's 3 levels: compiled, reviewed, and audited. Audits are very expensive, and unless you're a large company, it probably doesn't make sense to do that. But getting up to a reviewed statement, it's probably a 2-year process, because it's a little less expensive if you do it in stages. So we would suggest 3 to 4 years out from the sale, you're going to step up to a compilation, which is really just your CPA firm taking your QuickBooks numbers, putting them on their letterhead and saying, we take no responsibility for these, but here they are. So that's why that doesn't have that much value for a buyer. It has a little bit. But the next step is what's called a reviewed financial, which they're not doing audit procedures where they're like verifying that your accounts receivable and your inventory really exist and stuff like that. But they are doing statistical testing and a little deeper questioning regarding financial results. And that gets an actual opinion saying that the CPA firm believes that the financial statements are reasonable, something like that. I forget the exact wording of the opinion. Again, it's not an audit, but that level of financial statement definitely gives a buyer some comfort. So I think that's one thing from the accounting side. The other is kind of goes back to the systems and ties into what you said. It takes a while till everybody has confidence in what's being generated in the system. I know, the clients that you, Corby, and I all work on together, Corby goes in and does a really great job of kind of revamping their financial procedures and their reporting if they need it. And, I'm not sure what your experience is with the clients, but in mine, it seems like it takes about 2.5 years before that's really running like clockwork.
Yeah.
So again,
that's exactly right. Because
definitely a time there.
Change, a lot of times it is kind of cleaning up what's disorganized to begin with, or maybe doesn't, or creating what doesn't even exist, but then actually changing habits. People within the organization who are responsible for those kind of things, they've been doing things a certain way, or they haven't been doing them at all. And so it's change of behaviors, and all that kind of stuff can take time.
Yeah. And one basic thing that just kind of popped in my head when we were talking about Corby is just budgeting. And most clients don't budget.
Yeah. No.
So when you're going to sell your company, if you can show the buyer, these are our budgets for the last 4 years, and this, budget versus actual, and then you're kind of presenting them with projections, if you've been hitting your budget numbers, they're going to be really happy, and they're going to look at those projections as being realistic. If you have no history of budgeting, they're going to look at your projections like you just picked them out of the air. So that's another area where it's good to have a track record.
Yeah, I would say 7 out of 10 clients, new clients that we bring on, Corby does that.
Yeah,
helps them put a budgeting process and budget in place.
Yeah.
And then correlating with that would be a growth strategy, future forecast, which is often not in place either. And that's very helpful. If you go to the deal table and you have a well thought through, detailed plan for growth for the future that can be substantiated by how you've performed in the past, you can start your negotiation at a much higher level than if you didn't have those things. And again, those things just can take time to be put in place if indeed you don't have those things, or they're not at peak performance. Other value drivers would include, we mentioned financial performance, we mentioned management team, now we've mentioned growth strategy, financial controls, tax planning, of course. We mentioned businesses being too centralized or too dependent on the owner. Also, businesses don't want to be too dependent on any one other key employee or 1 or 2 customers. So
I was just going to bring that up there.
Customer diversification is absolutely essential, and that could take time too to make that happen. Cash flow in, cash flow out, or cash flow management, having that tight. Buyers want to see money coming in quicker than it's going out, because they know oftentimes they got to write 2 checks, 1 check to buy the business, and then maybe another check to operate the business short term, and they don't want to write a big check for that. So if you're running your business in a way that the cash flow is coming in quicker than it's going out, that's a good thing, but that can take time to get in place too. Recurring revenue is huge. Maybe you can speak to that as to when valuing a business, putting a value on it, how important is recurring revenue these days? And again, that can take time. If you're just starting to build a service or offering that has recurring revenue, it can take time to build that up. How important is that as a valuator, recurring revenue to the valuation of a business?
Well, you look at the 2 big factors in the valuation. One is the benefit stream, which we usually identify as cash flow to the owner, and then the riskiness of the benefit stream. if you've got recurring income, like for instance, a CPA firm with audit clients or tax clients, they generally come back. So that makes that a less risky benefit stream, which means you're going to have a higher valuation.
Recurring revenue, then are you differentiated from your competition? And if so, how? That's another value driver.
Yeah.
Customer
The other thing, Pat, I think, and this might not need 5 years, but something people need to, or our listeners need to be aware of as they get ready to sell their business, maybe 1 or 2 years out. A lot of times closely held businesses will, you take advantage of the fact that you have a business, and maybe you run some stuff through there that, it's not illegal, but maybe you're kind of running stuff through that is a little bit questionable. It's best to clean that up ahead of time rather than have to tell the buyer, yeah, I lost money last year, but I really didn't because I paid X, 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 and X for myself. So you'll take a little bit of a tax hit maybe for a year or two, but in the long run, it's going to be worth it.
Yeah, and then some other things that come to mind in regard to planning for a third-party sale. You mentioned pre-sale due diligence. That's wise to just stay on top of that through the years. But then also maybe reducing company debt, or reducing the financial dependence of the business on the owner or owners.
Yeah.
Removing owners from personally guaranteeing corporate debt. That can take time, and that can be an important thing to do.
Yeah, and one thing we talked about, I think we just did it, maybe it was one of our last 3 podcasts, we talked about working capital. So again, when you go to net proceeds from the sale, one of the things that's going to hit your proceeds is you're going to need to leave a certain amount of working capital in the business. So knowing that, and if you have enough time, you understand what working capital is and what the buyer is going to demand in that area. You can start to clean things up a little bit to reduce the amount of working capital that they're going to need because you're running the company more efficiently. And that's going to increase your net sales proceeds.
Yeah. So does anything else come to mind in regard to third-party sales and why it can take so much time to prepare for that exit route? Anything else come to mind?
I think you've done a great job of covering it all. The only other thing I would say is when you're looking at third-party sales, a lot of times it's a customer or a competitor. So it's nice to kind of just develop a good relationship with those people, not in the context of, hey, I might want to, sell to you someday, but just get to know them so they know you, they like you, they trust you. So when the day does come, if you want to approach them, the door's wide open for you.
Yeah, and we've only hit on we're scratching the surface here in 30 minutes or whatever with anything that we've mentioned. There's a lot of drill down issues, and there are other issues that aren't coming to mind today. One just did. Third party. If you're heading toward a third party sale in the future, short term and long term, then you have to think about your key employees and key and important employees, and how am I going to keep them during a transition? Because oftentimes a buyer, depending on what the business is, the industry, and why they're buying you, what kind of buyer is buying you, those key employees may be key to them, and they may want at least some of them to stick around and have you put a plan in place to make that happen, or to ensure that they're not going to bail or jump ship as soon as you sell the business. But anyway, we've scratched the surface here in regard to third-party sales. Hopefully this will give you some idea, though, listeners, as to why it's important to start years in advance, to start putting these things in place. Oh, and by the way, here's another thought. You got to monitor this with a continual gap analysis, if you will. It's kind of like retirement planning. You and your wealth manager, you get together and you look at your 401k and all your other investment assets, and the wealth manager runs a needs analysis, and they say, okay, based on when you're thinking of retiring And this is the amount of money that you're going to need to do everything you want to do. And this is what you have currently in all your investable assets, your 401k and everything else. And here's your current gap. Well, you need to do that same kind of gap analysis with your, what is oftentimes your biggest asset, your business. So often owners don't have a regular objective analysis of where they stand as pertaining to the actual value of their business. So they really don't even know until they go to market at what it's really worth. And then so many times it's a sad awakening to reality as to what it actually is worth. So what would you say about that? Again, Walter, as a evaluator, how regular or how consistent an owner should be in getting their business valued for that purpose?
Yeah, I mean, I like our process where when we bring a client in, we do an estimate of value. It doesn't cost them an arm and a leg. At the same time, you do the readiness assessment, which helps to identify the value drivers, where they're weak, where they're strong. And I think really you can update that once a year, which is not a big deal at all. But I think you're right. I think at least annually, and you just do it at the same time you're doing your tax return or whatever. It makes it pretty easy. And you just keep updating it every year.
Yeah, it's not a real cumbersome process.
No.
I mean, if you do it annually,
right?
It's kind of like an annual checkup where you maybe annually you look at your 401k statement. Well, maybe annually you should take a look at what the value of my business really is. And is there a gap between what it's valued at now, what I need it to be valued at when I eventually leave?
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. Okay, so let's quickly, we've already gone 30 minutes. Let's quickly hit some highlights of sale to insiders, including kids and including ESOPs, because we can kind of lump it all together. What comes to mind here, apart from what we've already talked about? Oh, and what we've already talked about really does apply to these other exit routes. Because if you're going to sell to key employees, more often than not, they don't have the money to buy your business. So you're going to be, on some level, self-financing it for a period of years. And so you've got an inherent interest in the business continuing to grow and even have a higher growth rate. So you need the right people in place to make that happen. So your successors are absolutely key to this scenario. The key employees who have indicated interest in buying my business, they've been great key employees, but would they be great owners?
Yeah.
How can I assess that? And then I better assess it sooner rather than later, because if there are gaps there, maybe I can fill those gaps with some coaching over the next couple of years, so that when they actually do become majority owners or control owners, they can actually be good owners. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind is the successors and how long that can take to make sure they've got the ownership skills in order to be as successful, or even more so, as an owner as the current owners are. What else comes to your mind?
Well, I think kind of what you led off with, in that you're wrong if you believe that you're going to sell to insiders, so it's going to be a lot easier and you don't need a lot of time, because it's all the steps we talked about pretty much have to be done. Now, maybe instead of building a management team, you're doing what you just talked about, assessing the current group as to ownership. If you're going to do an ESOP, you really need to have good, consistent earnings. So, you're going to want to have a pretty good track record of consistent growth, consistent profitability, because you don't want to put a company into an ESOP where the valuation is going to be going up and down a lot. People don't like that in their retirement accounts for obvious reasons. So I think really the takeaway regarding the other types of exits is that they require pretty much all the same stuff that sale to a third party does. And, there's no shortcuts, no big reduction in time.
No, and sometimes they do require, for instance, ESOPs, let me just mention this about ESOPs too. Yeah, strong financial performance, strong management team. Again, you're going to need that. Minimal long-term debt and steady increasing revenue. Those are some of the things that you're going to need to have in place and proven.
Yeah.
If you're going to put an ESOP in place. Yeah. Let's see, what else was I going to say? Oh, in regard to like sale to insiders or maybe even more so sale to children, sometimes there's almost all the time, there's some personal planning gaps there in regard to estate planning and maybe tax planning. You mentioned one a few minutes ago with this current client that's hoping to sell between 10 and 15 million. And you mentioned a personal planning tool or strategy, charitable remainder trust. So sometimes when it comes to transferring the business to your kids or even insiders, period, and to third-party sale, because if you're going to sell for $15 million, you might be in a place, and you might be charitable, you might be philanthropic, where it would be wise to transfer some of the shares into a CRT or a CLT or use a GRAT in the case of a transfer to kids, a guarantor.
Retained annuity, grantor retained annuity
exactly.
trust.
Thank you. But using these tools, putting them in place well in advance to get business interest out of your estate. So these things need to be done well in advance usually, or at least thought through, because it can take time to think through, plan, and make decisions on these kind of things. Maybe you can speak to this a little bit. Non-deferred compensation often ends up being a piece of the puzzle when it comes to particularly insider sales. And explain why that could take some time to put that in place and where it might even be, a potential solution.
Yeah. So oftentimes a transfer to insiders, you're trying to, as we've talked about in other podcasts, you're probably not going to get top dollar. You're going to be paid out over time. So one of the strategies there is we supplement what the owner gets from the sale of the business with some type of deferred compensation plan. In order for that to work, the deferred compensation plan has to be put into place in advance of the transaction, and preferably, like a year in advance, maybe even more. So if you're going to do that, that's going to require some time. You generally do that because from a net after tax perspective, the sellers are going to be less out of pocket. The buyer might be a little bit less income than he would otherwise receive, but you can kind of true that up based on the tax savings that the sellers or the buyer's getting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we've gone 40 minutes. We'll wrap up here in a second. The one thing that we have not mentioned that's absolutely essential for a successful exit is planning for life after the business. We've mentioned this many times that, a great percentage, it's 75% or so of business owners who exit are miserable within 2 years. And it's because they haven't thought long and hard enough prior to leaving what they're going to do next. And it's often tied to, significance and purpose and meaning to life, because as a business owner, if you've done it for any period of time, you've had great impact, and you've found significance and purpose and meaning in the work, even if you're having a rough month or year or whatever. And so when that's gone, what are you going to replace it with? And that can take time to think through. A lot of owners, think they know what they're going to do. And some do, I guess, of course, but they find out once they sell, you know what, I didn't think through this long and hard enough. I should have had more of a plan in place for this, because I've golfed a lot in the last year. I've been on my boat a lot. Now I don't know what to do. So that's another big issue that you really should put time into, more than 30 minutes or a couple of hours. Anything else come to mind here, Walter? Again, what the purpose of our conversation here today was just to help people understand, listeners to understand at least some of the reasons that we say start planning now, start planning today. Anything else come to mind?
The only other thing I would comment on is the transfer to family members. If you've got family members in and outside of the business, that can be a delicate situation. It's going to take some time to address. You may even want to bring in a professional of some type to help the family address it. So that's not the kind of thing where you just want to, at dinner one night, say, hey, I've decided to, give the business to Bobby or whatever. So that can take time.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And that's why I mentioned the estate planning piece a few minutes ago, is that's often a big issue. We've got a situation like that right now. Kids in, kids out. What does fair look like in regard to state distribution? That can take a lot of time. Here's something else that can take a lot of time. Now that you brought family businesses back up again. Let's say you've got a very successful family business. We've got another client like this currently, and they have options because they have built a very sellable business. Great brand, great financial performance, on and on. And so they could sell for quite a bit of money to a third party. They could sell to insiders. They could do an ESOP. And as you and I know, we don't run into a whole lot of ESOP candidates in the businesses that we work with. But they could be an ESOP. They could sell to insiders. They've got a good management team in place. And they've got a couple of kids in the business and a couple of kids not in the business. So it's taking time for this owner just to make a decision which route he wants to go down. And he's got a couple of minority partners now. And so that alone is going to take, that alone is going to take a couple of years. Yeah, because he's into the second year of really just thinking about that decision and having a real hard time making it.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Oh, and that's one last thing we'll say here as we wrap up, is if you build a sellable business, you'll have more options for exit. You may decide just to keep it for the rest of your life and be an absentee owner and pass it on or sell it at death, because you like the cash flow from it, and the business is not real risky and it's got great cash flow and so on and so forth. But if you do that, it's going to be a sellable business because it's going to be able to run itself without you. So the one foundational common thing here is to build a business that is sellable or transferable if you want maximum options for exit. All right, well, good. I'll close this out unless you have something else, Walter.
No, I think this has been good. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, so listeners, if you want help in planning for your eventual exit, you can access virtual planning resources and get in touch with us at exitreadiness.com. And if you use the code podcast, all caps, when setting up a free Exit Readiness account and buying any of the products there, you'll receive a 10% discount on anything that you purchase. So thanks for listening. Until next time on the Exit Readiness podcast, signing off.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Until next time on the Exit Readiness podcast, this is Pat Ennis and Walter Dials signing off.